Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you...
Hey there, welcome to Self-Inflicted Oral Nostalgia, the Guided by Voices podcast, every GBV LP, every 2 weeks. Today we'll be taking a look at 2012's Class Clown Spots a UFO. But first, as usual, all music heard in this podcast is played and owned by Guided by Voices. Any reviews or materials cited are owned by their respective creators. And of course, all hail Jeff Warren's Guided by Voices database located at gbvdb.com. Visit everygbvlp.com to subscribe to future episodes or listen to past episodes of this podcast. And write to me if you want at jeff@everygbvlp.com. Now let's get to the show. So today we'll be looking at GBV's second record of 2012 and the 17th Guided by Voices album overall, Class Clown Spots a UFO. Now there's not much to report in terms of what was happening within the band at this time. Oftentimes from record to record and thus from episode to episode, there will be a new label or a new band member or some big trend or event in either the musical world or else within the personal lives of the people in the band. But in this case, as far as all of that stuff goes, things were pretty much holding steady from the environment surrounding the last LP, Let's Go Eat the Factory. The band was back together, they toured, they put out a record. The record did well, so they figured fuck it and kept going. It was, when you think of it, a pretty stunning turn of events, and no one seemed more amazed by this than the group themselves. When an interviewer asked guitarist Mitch Mitchell, was the band planning on releasing 2 records in such quick succession, he answered, "That pretty much took us by surprise. I didn't even expect to do the first album." The group kept writing, so the records kept coming. There would even be a third LP before the year was out. However, it wasn't just that Pollard and the guys were churning out songs. After all, that's just standard operating procedure for Bob. And Toby, too, was on a streak around this time, having put out his best record just a few years prior. The Bluebirds of Happiness tried to land on my shoulder. The only thing that really changed, in terms of looking at this album contrasted with the previous one, is that with the LP we're talking about today, the group made a concerted effort to give the new songs a much more polished sound. Pollard, probably sensing, the same way he did in 1996, that staying in the basement was creative death, opted to head into the studio for a large number of the tracks on this LP. In fact, Let's Go Eat the Factory would be pretty much the last time Bob released an LP full of home recordings. Even the lo-fi GBV record, Please Be Honest, where Pollard played every instrument, was recorded in a studio. So this time around, in addition to having a few songs recorded at home, a large number of the tracks were recorded in studios around Ohio, such as Cro-Magnon and Waterloo Sound, with former producer Todd Tobias doing a bit of engineering. One interesting thing to note is that, in addition to the studios and occasional basement, the band also recorded a number of songs at the former location of BHA Piano, a retailer which is an Ohio institution. BHA stands for Better Home Appliances. It was founded by World War II veteran Emmett Royer, who began selling vacuum cleaners door-to-door when he returned home from overseas. This led him to opening an appliance store, and in 1953 he branched out to pianos and organs. He was a mainstay on Dayton television, where his quirky TV ads, many featuring his dog, Toby, ran for 50 years. Also, the same as Pollard, Royer attended and was a star athlete at Northridge High School. The heightened fidelity of the songs GBV recorded at BHA and elsewhere means that the resulting record sounds really good. It is, in fact, in my mind, a huge advance over the somewhat grab-bag nature of the previous album. And this went a long way toward proving to people that a reunited GBV was no novelty. Bob was serious. As website Pop Matters wrote, "It's not a rumor anymore, folks. Guided by Voices are back in a big way." Consequence of Sound struck a similar note, writing, "The reunion is over." They didn't mean that the band broke up. It was exactly the opposite. It's like, at a certain point, when you get back with your ex, they're not your ex anymore. It's just who you're with. And that's what happened with the band. Class Clown was the second GBV record to come out on the band's own Guided by Voices Inc. label. In fact, every record by the group since Let's Go Eat the Factory has come out on this label. And for the first time in Pollard's career, his own label seemed and felt and acted like the real thing. He was no longer just coming up with weird names and slapping a logo on the sleeve. like he'd done early in his career with Rocket No. 9 Records, or even around this time with Happy Jack Rock Records. Instead, Guided by Voices Inc. and the band's management was doing a good job of getting the group exposure. The label was doing marketing, the band was getting booked on TV shows, and songs were being premiered on music websites. GBV had managed to finally merge the autonomy of their early years, writing, recording, and releasing whatever they wanted, with the accessibility and profile of the years they spent on independent record labels. Sure, they still weren't getting played on the radio, but then again, they didn't get played on the radio in the 90s either. At least now they didn't have to worry about recouping in advance or getting charged back for dinners or videos. This is because Bob had found a group of core friends, fans, and professionals to look after his label, the website, and his affairs, and they all did, and continue to do today, a great job. The cover for Class Clown features a really striking Pollard collage, which is emphasized because there's so much blank space around it. Also because it's sitting in a sea of black, with white type above a circular design, which features mostly a creepy baby face. It makes for a super nice sleeve. In fact, I'd say it's my favorite GBV cover of all time, behind only Mag Earwig. The inside collage features part of a book from the Flesh Public Library. And while that sounds sort of illicit or erotic, like something you'd find in an Andy Warhol movie, there's a much more banal explanation behind the name. The Flesh Public Library is another name for the Piqua Public Library, Piqua being a town about 30 miles north of Dayton. The library dates from about 1890, and around 1930, local businessman Leo Flesh made a donation which allowed the trustees to buy a new location for the library on West Green Street. And, by the way, Flesh, in a twist of irony that's almost too good to be true, was actually the founder of the Atlas Underwear Company. Anyway, the library was then renamed in his honor. And just to show the ravages of inflation, the card listed in the collage states that the fine for overdue books is 3 cents a day. Well, it's now up to a quarter. Class Clown spawned 3 singles, John the Croc, Keep It in Motion, and the LP's title track. For Keep It in Motion, they made a video. It's pretty minimal, but it's also really good. It features a magician backstage as he gets ready for his routine. The magician's name is Magic Stan, and he's played by John Glaser. Glaser is a writer, comedian, and director. He's been on a bunch of TV shows and even had his own show on Adult Swim called Delocated, which featured him wearing a ski mask for all 3 seasons of the show's run. He also seems to be a fan of the band. In a 2012 Q&A with Magnet magazine, when asked about the role music plays in his life, Glaser answered that he listens to music every day and that Guided by Voices has been my main dishes cleaning band as of late. The video was directed by Todd Lamb, who's actually a huge GBV fan. In fact, this wasn't the first time he'd worked with Pollard. In 2009, he directed the video for the Boston Spaceships song, Let It Rest for a Little While, from their third LP, 0 to 99. I emailed Todd, and he was kind enough to answer a few questions about the video. I'll post those to the Facebook page. It should also be noted that pretty much all of the singles from this year had non-album tracks as B-sides, which, if you add those tracks to the dozens that were on the 3 records that also came out in 2012, you get a picture of just how prolific the band was during this period. In fact, this is something I'll talk about over the next 2 episodes. During the discussion of Bears for Lunch, I'll talk about why and how Pollard himself is so prolific, and in the episode focused on English Little League, I'll delve into what this all means for us as fans. But for this LP, now that we're 2 records into the reunion, let's talk about how these and the ensuing albums fit into the GBV story and discography, not to mention how potent and important nostalgia is to these and the next couple of LPs that the band would release. So, when the initial reunion was announced back in 2010, it was seen by a lot of people as nothing more than a victory lap, a bunch of drinking buddies getting back together to relive fun times. It was a celebration more than anything else. The old lineup was playing the old songs and people loved it, and for some bands, that's enough. For example, I'm a huge Kraftwerk fan, but the group, since their heyday in the 70s and 80s, have released only a handful of new songs. Instead, what they continue to do is rework and re-release their back catalog. And while it's fairly bizarre that a group who was once all about the future is now all about the past, the band seems okay with this. And me, as a fan, I guess I'm okay with it too. They play concerts, and when they do, they perform a bunch of songs from 1975 or 1986, and that's good enough for me. But it wasn't good enough for Pollard, so he decided to record a new album. And when he did that, the situation turned into something else. The band became, somehow and against a whole lot of odds, Guided by Voices all over again. However, instead of going into a studio and knocking out a record, they returned to their basements. And that made a lot of sense, since this lineup had never really, after all, made a proper record. The closest they came was a week or so in Memphis with Kim Deal in the 90s, before Bob decided he'd had enough and got the hell out of there. So these guys weren't just singing songs from 1993 and 1996. They were trying to sort of go back in time and recreate the working methods that had led to the writing and recording of those songs in the first place. And while it's real hard to have lightning strike twice in the same location, that's what GBV was trying to do. And what's amazing is that it kind of worked. I mean, I'm a huge fan of this record and this period of the band. These post-reunion records are really, really good. In fact, I view this whole period as more of a sequel to the mid and late 90s era of the band rather than just a reunion. Because they didn't just get back together, they kept going and tried to basically pick up where they left off. And that's a real dangerous thing to do, because recreating the chemistry or atmosphere that led to success the first time around is really tricky, if not downright impossible, to recreate. Writing about the new music that the Pixies put out in 2014, Pitchfork wrote that, "Many groups go away then return to us diminished. Goody Mob, Black Flag, The Stooges, Smashing Pumpkins. We have more or less reconciled ourselves to this phenomenon. But very few bands come back wiped clean of their basic essence as the Pixies did." And in a review of that band's first full-length record since 1991's Trompe le Monde, Pitchfork summed up the recent history of Pixies, declaring that what was once a valorous underdog victory narrative has slowly turned into a cautionary tale about pissing away all of the goodwill you've accrued. How did GBV escape this fate? Why didn't critics and fans say the same thing about them? Why wasn't Class Clown Spots UFO, not to mention all the other LPs GBV put out around this time, just an increasingly mournful asterisk affixed to a beloved legacy, as Pitchfork said of the new Pixies material? Is Bob really that much of a genius? Well, yes and no. I think what spared GBV from those kind of reviews and accusations of sullying their reputations and ruining their legacy was that the band pulled off a very difficult trick. Their new material was familiar, and yet it was also original. As website The Quietus wrote around this time in a review for The Bears for Lunch, this post-reunion version of the band has been dislocated from its original meaning and reassembled into something distinctly new. GBV managed to achieve the same feel and general approach of their earlier work without openly aping it. They were dealing the same way as the Pixies in sounds they'd forged in the 90s, but they managed to somehow make it feel contemporary. GBV's new songs retain the spirit of their original work, even to some degree the template, but managed to also be imbued with something open and fresh. And by the way, GBV knew what it was doing. In marketing materials accompanying their first post-reunion LP, Guided by Voices Inc. wrote that fans of GBV's iconic release B-1000 will recognize the same gloriously messy aesthetic in Let's Go Eat the Factory. And for Class Clown, a press release said it offered a generous helping of Alien Lanes-style snippets, adding, in fact, the sequencing of Class Clown harkens back to that landmark LP. They weren't hiding from their biggest records, they were explicitly comparing their new work to their previous classics. So their past and nostalgia in general was nothing the band was running away from. They were, in essence, stating, meet the new GBV, same as the old GBV, and yet they managed to make this not be a bad thing. What's even more remarkable about all this is that Bob never really seemed like a nostalgia guy. I mean, part of his whole short attention span thing means he doesn't dwell on anything for too long. This can apply to the present or the past. Here's what he told Rolling Stone in 2013. When I make an album, I tire of it pretty quickly. I may listen to it for a week after it's finished, and then I put it away. Within another few weeks, I may have written 10 or 15 new songs. By the time one album comes out, I'm already tired of listening to it, and it's on to the next. So the fact that he had the inclination, let alone the patience, to revisit a period of the band's past says a lot. And when you figure that this experiment managed to stretch into years, you begin to see it as a real triumph. Personally, when thinking of this incarnation of the band, I never ask, why didn't it last longer? Instead, I marvel at the fact it lasted as long as it did. When it came time to review Class Clown Spots UFO, Delusions of Adequacy wrote that, whereas its predecessor was tentative in rebuilding the GBV brand, perhaps fearing a post-reunion sophomore slump by over-delivering too soon, this sequel is a much more assured, rounded, and relaxed affair. Similar to the previous LP, this review singles out Tobin's songs, writing, "As with Let's Go Eat the Factory, some of the most rejuvenating revelations come from returning co-pilot Tobin Sprout." The AV Club, giving the record a B+, wrote that, "As with Factory, the strength of UFO is that it sounds like a true GBV record, rather than simply a clandestine avenue for Pollard's solo material." They, too, singled out Sprout, writing, "If anything, Pollard's sidekick and sounding board, Tobin Sprout, is even more prominent this time around," adding, "Best of all, he joins Pollard in the chorus of the album's purest pop song, the bouncy Keep It in Motion, with an ease that belies the time they've spent apart. Let's hope they keep this reunion in motion." However, Pitchfork fought against this idea, writing, "Tobin Sprout's age-defying voice and surplus of solid songs helped his return to the fold on Factory seem especially triumphant. This time around, it's Bob's show all the way." It goes on to say, "Pollard seems the looser dude here, providing Class Clown with nearly all of its gnarlier rockers and oddball overtures." And in terms of where the LP sat in terms of the rest of the band's discography, Pop Matters called Class Clown one of the strongest LPs that Guided by Voices have ever released. So now let's dig into the record song by song. The album kicks off with He Rises, Our Union Bellboy. You can tell from this first song that we're already in different territory from the last record. It was recorded at a studio and it sounds better than pretty much anything on Let's Go Eat the Factory. Plus, at 3 minutes long, it's one of the longer tracks on the record. It's a good song and a fun one and a nice way to open what is a really great LP. By the way, bellboys, also commonly known as bellhops, derive from the 19th century word bellhopper, which, as you can probably tell, is someone who hops into action when a bell is rung. They're most commonly found in hotels, where they take bags to rooms and do other assorted errands for guests. And yes, some bellhops belong to unions, often under the umbrella of the Hotel, Restaurant, Institutional Employees and Bartenders Union. In Pollard's home state of Ohio in 2017, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were 520 people working as baggage porters and bellhops, where they earned an average yearly salary of $21,000. In terms of popular culture, there's a very silly Jerry Lewis film from 1960 called The Bellboy that Pollard probably saw on TV growing up. And of course, The Who have a song, one of the few to feature Keith Moon, that's part of their 1973 rock opera Quadrophenia. In the 1979 film version, the bellboy is played by Sting. GBV's song seems to reference this song, since Townsend's bellboy promised to keep my lip buttoned down, and Pollard's promises being similarly obedient, no pulling on the leash. Second track is Blue Battleship's Bay.
Get out your blue battle. Get out the blue battleship's bay. Feed the world. Feed the world.
This is a really fun song which, being engineered by Todd Tobias, sounds really good. This is a return to the mid-fight later records of GBV. This shows that they weren't only striving for a return to the territory of B-1000 and Alien Lanes. The word Battleship is most likely a Pollardian twist of battleship. The song also mentions Cleopatra's shoes. This is used most often to describe a style of women's sandal which has a lot of buckles and straps. Third song is Forever Until It Breaks. This really nice track is Tobin Sprout's first song on the record. Whereas the track Waves on the previous LP was filled with nightmare imagery of being surrounded and subsumed by the ocean, this song finds Tobin at his most idyllic, repeating over a pastoral backing track, We Walked Along the Water. It ends with Sprout repeating, All Breathe. It's a really nice track which once again shows how welcome his contributions on GBV LPs were. Fourth song is the title track, Class Clown Spots a UFO.
Everybody should be touching the sky, but you never, never, never can go down, So slow down.
This is an absolutely stellar song, showing just how good this incarnation of GBV was proving to be. It's not only a good song for this record, or this incarnation of the band, it stands up alongside the group's best work from any period. It also shows just how much was lost during the years when Pollard was focused on sounding on record like a hard rock band. So many of the band's best songs, for me anyway, aren't necessarily the wannabe stadium rockers. Instead, they're the ultra-melodic, slightly quirky compositions like this one. Yes, Baba O'Reilly is great, but I also love to take a stroll down Penny Lane. And really, this song has it all. Faux horns, hand claps, great background vocals, an instrumental breakdown, and a jaunty beat that you just can't resist. Plus, it's recorded absolutely perfectly, with a dozen really nice small touches that add up to a very special song. As Pitchfork wrote in their review of the record, it's one of those dizzyingly catchy Pollard songs that seems to sew 2 or 3 viable hooks together. Its crisscrossing chorus, the product of some serious craftsmanship on Pollard's part. The song has a long history, first appearing as part of the almost 12-minute long song suite, Special Astrology for the Warlock Tour. That epic track was eventually pruned down to just Propellers, Over the Neptune Mesh-Gear Fox, and Circus World. The next time Class Clown appeared was as Crocker's favorite song on the King Shit and the Golden Boys compilation in 1995. That version was part of the early B1000 track listing, back when the LP was planning on being titled Instructions to the Rusty Time Machine. As Pop Matters wrote of that version, when it first appeared, it was a thing of absolute devastation, a song of heartbreak. Here, on Class Clown, it's reworked into a warm celebration. That transition from bleak to utterly winsome seems to serve as a good metaphor for the recent change of fate for the band. It also serves as a persistent reminder of Guided by Voices' enviable versatility. Yet a different demo version also appears on Suitcase 3. And in terms of UFO sightings, according to data collected by a student at George Mason University, there have been more than 100,000 UFO sightings in the past 100 years. How many of those were spotted by Class Clowns? I'm not sure. Next song is Chained to the Moon.
Rise and fall, chained to the moon. Breaker broke, all built us a bridge and a spoon. Rise and fall, chained to the moon. Breaker broke.
This is a really nice song that finds Pollard singing against just an acoustic guitar. It's a short song, but it's absolutely gorgeous. The idea of extending some sort of chain all the way up to our moon goes back at least in 1938, when Buckminster Fuller published a book called 9 Chains to the Moon, the title referring to the concept that if all the world's population stood on each other, they would form a human chain that would stretch from Earth to the moon back and forth 9 times. In terms of a literal chain to the moon, I found a very complicated and geeky discussion on Reddit about the scientific properties of just such a situation. I'll post that to the Facebook page. Next track is Hang Up and Try Again. This is a fun song with Bob sounding a bit country, like how he sounded on the early records before he started resorting more to his English accent. And, of course, anyone who grew up before the 90s probably recognizes the phrase, hang up and try again. It's something you used to hear when you try to reach someone on a landline, only to not have the call go through. It's something called an intercept message. According to Wikipedia, an intercept message is a telephone recording informing the caller that the call cannot be completed. There have been a number of great phone-related songs over the years, from ELO's Telephone Line and Jim Croce's Operator to Kraftwerk's The Telephone Call. And while this song isn't quite in the same league as those, it's a lot of fun. Next up is Keep It in Motion.
Keep it in motion. Keep it in line. Keep it in motion. Keep it on time. Walk it down the line.
This song features Sprout and Pollard singing together for the first time since Propellers' 14 Cheerleader Cold Front, and needless to say, the results are really nice. In fact, website Delusions of Adequacy wrote that Sprout's best contribution comes through duetting with Pollard on the transcendental indie pop bliss of Keep It in Motion, the album's overwhelming highlight. And while I think the record has plenty of other highlights that outshine this track, it is indeed a fun song. As an idea, Keep It in Motion could be seen as the perfect encapsulation of Pollard's whole career. As he said, the point is to keep it in motion, get it done, and move on. Because really, the opposite is inertia, defined as a tendency to do nothing or to remain unchanged. And that's just not Pollard's style. So I consider this, along with Don't Stop Now, to be both a great slogan for Bob and the group and a declaration of intent in terms of what he stands for as a person. The song segues right into Tyson's High School. If Black Sabbath tried to rewrite Be True to Your School, I imagine it would sound a lot like this song. And while the Beach Boys often wrote about the pleasures of youth, as well as trying to regain the joy of being young in songs like Do It Again, Pollard here takes a more fatal and unsentimental view, opening the song by writing, "You can't go back and roll now. School spirit is no match for old age." Second to last song on side 1 is They and Them.
When the days are older, yea, they and them. Yea, they and them.
This is one of the few short Tobin Sprout songs that really doesn't work for me. It's just a minute long, and the entire track consists of nothing but Sprout chanting, "When the days are older, they and them." It sort of segues right into the final song on side 1, Fighter Pilot. This is another Sprout song, and it's also pretty slight. It's mainly just some garbled voices until Tobin, at the end, mumbles something about a fighter pilot, as well as name-checking his song Spider Fighter from the previous LP. It's certainly not a great song, but it has a fun groove. First song on side 2 is Roll of the Dice, Kick in the Head. This is the shortest song on the record at just 46 seconds. However, despite its brevity, and even though I was pretty hard on the song snippets of Alien Lanes, I really like this track. Yeah, it's short, but it feels full. It crams a lot into its 46 seconds, and more than anything, it's just fun to listen to. Second song on side 2 is Billy Wire. Speaking of short songs, this one is an absolute masterpiece at just a few seconds past 2 minutes. In fact, with the exception of an odd middle 8 break which finds the song just sort of stopping, this track gets back to the punk spirit found on the Grand Hour's Shocker in Gloomtown. Drowned in Sound noted that the song bears a similarity to the chorus of Nirvana's Breed, which, yeah, I can kind of hear. In terms of the song's title, it may have been derived from the 1963 British film Billy Liar, starring Tom Courtenay and Julie Christie. Third song on side 2 is Worm with 7 Broken Hearts. This is a very short and ragged song that name-checks Billy Wire from the previous track. And it's not really a song, it's just Pollard singing 2 verses over some guitars that sound like a hurricane, pounding drums, and a lead guitar that sounds sort of Middle Eastern. And yet, as ramshackle as this track is, there's an even more ragged version. A home-fi version is on the B-side of the Class Clown Spots UFO single, home-fi being Bob's name for his boombox recordings he does at his house. It's interesting to listen to, if only to see just how ragged the remake of the song is. It's as if an architect drew a smudgy picture of a house on a napkin, and then built the house and it actually looked like a smudge. Also, just for the record, worms don't have 7 hearts, they have 5. Next song is Starfire.
World Worlds are falling down like raindrops. Worlds are falling down like raindrops.
This is another really nice Tobin Sprout song, which I think is about an alien invasion and planetary destruction, which, if it is, it's the nicest song about an alien invasion and planetary destruction I've ever heard. By this point, Tobin was beginning to record his songs on his own, playing all the instruments and just delivering to Bob the finished results. And because of that, some of them sound a bit out of place with the songs Pollard was recording with the rest of the band. And while his later song on this record, Lost in Spaces, perfectly complements the track right in front of it, Be Impeccable, this one doesn't sit quite as nicely between its neighbors, and you can sort of hear the band beginning to break into two branches. Whereas Sprout's songs on B-1000 and Alien Lanes were seamlessly woven into the overall structure, on the reunion records, as much as I love them, they're starting to stand out, and not in a good way. The next song is John the Croc.
Hopping the coastline, sniffing the gales, hopping the shoreline, driving the scales, let it glide like a crocodile around you.
This song, which is one of the 3 singles for the record, is really good. It has some nice vocals going on in the background that make the track sound huge, and there's some weird chorus or flange in the song that gives it a weird and woozy feel. With the lyrical references to a coastline, shoreline, going in for the kill and treading the waters, the song seems to indeed be about, as the title suggests, crocodiles. And as Pollard sings in the chorus, let him cry like a crocodile around you now. The origin of the phrase crocodile tears dates back to the 16th century and is based on the notion that, basically, crocodiles cry when they eat their prey. However, it's a physical reaction and not an emotional one. They're really not sad they're eating whatever it is they're eating, hence the use of the phrase to mean a faked or disingenuous emotion. And the fact that crocodiles cry while feeding was first reported by John Mandeville in the 14th century as part of his writing about his travels. Don't forget that the cover image of the cotton plant from Vampire on Titus first appeared as part of these writings. Next track is Fly Baby.
Dream fingers flipping the Me First machine. All is done and won for the war.
This is a really nice song featuring just acoustic and electric guitar and Bob's vocal. And while I love GBV's heavy rock songs, or their more whimsical or poppier side, like this album's title track, I also just love Pollard in singer-songwriter troubadour mode, like he is here. He just has a great voice, and it sounds really nice against a slowly strummed acoustic guitar. And while he had suggested at one point creating, with Tobin Sprout, a sort of Simon and Garfunkel record, he later cast doubt on the idea, saying, "It's really hard for me to grow up. I still like to rock." The next song is All of This Will Go.
It's getting harder to take this, I know. Waiting to see how your garden will grow. It's just we're freezing and staring at all of this snow.
The title seems to be a recasting of the ancient phrase, "This too shall pass," or "All things must pass." The latter was the name of George Harrison's mammoth triple record from 1970, and the former is an old Persian saying. In this particular song, the "this" that Sprout seems to be referring to is a temporary setback or condition, if not just winter. And his repetition of tap, tap, tap is almost like the tick-tock of a clock, as if the characters in the song are so looking forward to time passing that they're watching it count down by the second. Musically speaking, it's a really fun song. The fact that it's way under 2 minutes is a marvel since it feels like a totally complete track. Next song is The Opposite Continues.
Farther than the hills are what you expect and what you think you know is where you must go, stronger than the games.
This is a good hard rock song. The line, "Pretend to know the paradox within you," recalls the Who line, "Don't pretend that you know me, because I don't even know myself." We're all mysteries, even to ourselves. As the song winds down, there's some major shredding, showing that just because Doug Gillard was no longer in the band, Pollard had no intention of not having heavy guitar licks in his songs. Next up is Be Impeccable.
I can see you go, lift me up and go, no concerns to grow, no returns to show, that you've got to care a lot to know.
This is an absolutely stunning song which, I must admit, I've spent many a late night playing over and over. It's a prime example of how a song, and this is something GBV repeatedly proves, doesn't have to be recorded or played perfectly in order to be powerful. Now, that's probably not how the guys in Steely Dan used to see things, and even I get impatient with Bob when things are purposely sloppy. But here, the song sounds raw and live and immediate. With headphones, like a great Lou Reed song, you feel Bob sitting there just singing to you. The lyrics are also really touching, the narrator inviting someone to just be themselves and that, if they are, that'll be enough. Here's the chorus. Be what you are, be impeccable, the untrackable star. I'll shine my flashlight to where you are. I find that last line about the flashlight devastating. With it, Pollard's doing a number of things. First, he's showing the other person the way. He's a beacon. The object of the song can use the flashlight to find their way back home or just to him. But could also be a spotlight. Bob wants to celebrate and showcase this person. It's not just a signal, it's a tribute. And lastly, it's a connection. Within that perpetual darkness in which we all must live, if I shine my flashlight at you and you flash yours at me, we'll be touching, however faint the light. Another nice thing about this song is that it's paired really well with the second to last song, Lost in Spaces.
You make great things better, from bottles that turn into stones. I'm not sure if it seems to get better. You make great things better.
Similar to the last track, this song by Tobin is really beautiful. It's just Sprout singing against a pretty piano with some synth strings. He's practically whispering the lyrics, Tobin declaring that the song's subject makes great things better. In terms of the title, Lost in Space was a TV series that ran for 3 seasons in the 1960s. It has recently been brought back in 2018 as a series on Netflix. It's also the name of a very fine Luna song from their 1995 masterpiece, Penthouse. Final song is No Transmission.
No transmission, not from the start. No transmission in your heart. No transmission.
And while sure it would have been nice to end the LP with the previous song, thereby mimicking the 20-track B-1000, which similarly ended with a gentle song by Tobin Sprout, Pollard chooses to go out with a bang instead of a whimper. As Pop Matters wrote, this song expertly brings everything to a crashing close, reigniting an energetic fire that'll leave the listener on an adrenaline high. I agree, it's a good song to end the LP on. In fact, it's actually one of the best songs on the record. Musically, everyone sounds good. The drums are great, there's a nice bass line, and there's some nice lead guitar work. Bob's vocal melody, which on other songs can sometimes be at odds with the music he's singing on top of, is here totally integrated. It's just a really solid tune featuring everyone in the band. I don't find a ton of significance in the lyrics, but to quote the previous song, I'm not sure what it means, but I like it. At any rate, the record definitely goes out on a high note. Okay, that's it for the show. In 2 weeks, we'll be looking at the 18th GBV record and the third of 3 LPs the band released in 2012. Yes, we'll be having The Bears for lunch. Until then, subscribe to the show, leave a review, and God bless the Monument Club.